Welcome back to Let's Talk Careers. My name is Miss V, and I'm so excited to bring another incredible guest. Today, we are speaking with Phillip Wenturine, who is a university counselor and AP coordinator. Phillip, thank you for being with me today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate your time.
Super excited. We're going to be talking about all things Phillip and your career journey, and definitely tapping into what you do as a counselor and an AP coordinator. Before we do that, I want to take you on a little journey back in time when you were around the age of the students that you support today. What was it like for you? I know that you had interests in writing and that you thought you were destined to be a storyteller. And I believe that you are in some way, shape, or form. But when did you know, maybe I'm going to do it slightly differently in my career?
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting now looking back. I do feel like my original interest of wanting to be a storyteller kind of has come full circle, more so where I'm kind of helping other people craft their story. But I definitely fell into this by happenstance. I originally wanted to be a journalist or a creative writer. I envisioned myself maybe working for the New York Times. And I also liked graphic design, and I was on my school's newspaper and yearbook staff. And I actually liked the design aspect more than even the storytelling aspect, like making the page layouts and the photography and the like the graphics and the editing and things like that. And so I pictured myself working in New York and big city, bright lights, and doing some sort of graphic and journalism combination. And then somewhere along the way, I became an English teacher, and then I got into studying abroad and working abroad. And then all of the skills kind of overlapping and pursuing then career counseling. So it's interesting now, sitting in the counselor side of the desk, I do feel like I've accidentally fulfilled my vision to be a storyteller, but more so by helping others understand their story and put their voice out into the world.
Love it, love it, love it. So let's go into education. Your current role is mostly about helping young people, but a big part of that role is helping them think about post-secondary education. Looking at your education, you did your bachelor's, you did a master's, you went on and did a postgrad degree. Did you find your way through higher education? I know you said that your career, it was happenstance, which is also a career theory, definitely, a conversation that we will have in many other platforms, but in happenstance, it's about an opportunity arises and you kind of go with it and go in that flow. But looking at your education and looking at the timeline of your education, it looks like there was a little bit of a conscious awareness of what you were doing. So you went from your bachelor's to doing your master's, but you did a postgrad in between that as well. So was it education came first and then you kind of found your way through careers, or was it the careers were kind of coming up and you were building it with your education?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say the latter. The careers were coming up, and I was building it with my education, but I was being open to like opportunities, and I think that's something that I also like to push with my students. They often come in with like a plan in mind, and I let them embrace that, and I love that passion. But I also want to push for them to be open minded, because I think that's where the cool opportunities exist that we otherwise miss out on. And so I know for myself, I got an opportunity to go into the classroom right out of university. And it wasn't, I was like, well, I'm not going to be a journalist. I'm not going to be in New York City. I'm going to be in Florida. I'll be teaching in a classroom, teaching writing versus producing writing. But I was like, this is a really cool opportunity. And I can still utilize my passion for English and literature and words in the classroom and maybe inspire other people. So I kind of was open to that parallel opportunity in the same field that I studied. And I did that for a while. And then I realized during that experience that, okay, it wasn't necessarily journalism or teaching that was my passion, but I liked words and I liked writing. And so that's when I was like, I'm gonna go back and get a master's in creative writing, because the subject is becoming my passion. And so I think I was kind of developing as I was open to these opportunities career-wise. And then during that time, I missed being abroad. And so that's when I applied to do a postgrad in Portugal, where I did like a Fulbright scholarship, where I was able to kind of study abroad, teach abroad, help people get these fellowships to do the same thing that I was doing. And that's when I kind of was like, wait, am I teaching right now, or am I more like counseling? Am I advising? And so that's when I was like, I want to seek out more opportunities and careers that utilize these skill sets. And that's when I discovered that, full-time college and career counseling is an actual profession abroad. I hadn't been exposed to that before. And so now looking back, I think if I had just stuck with my original vision of being a journalist in New York City, I wouldn't have been able to tackle some things I didn't know existed. And so I think being open to opportunity is a really important thing for us as adults to still be aware of. I don't know what I'll be doing in 10 years from now either, but also reminding our students the same, that they should pursue their passions, but at the same time, don't box themselves in so they then otherwise miss opportunities.
I love that. Now, let's narrow in on your role currently in helping young people really look at higher education. It has got to be so challenging looking at that international context. You say that you're working across 5 countries right now: US, China, Portugal, Vietnam, and the UAE, helping over 2,000 students from over 100 nationalities, applying to 30 countries plus, plus, plus. How do you do it? I know that young people, especially in an international context, they're either thinking about returning to their home countries for study because it might be financially more economic, or they might be looking for another international experience. But at the same time, they're kind of like, you know what? Why limit myself? Let me just see what my options are. So one application can turn into dozens. How do you do it? And how do you suggest that a young person and their parents who are on that journey with them should really tackle or create the strategy for themselves so that, A, as you said, they're not limiting themselves to their idea of what the plan should be, and B, that it's more of an intentional process of really engaging in not just going to university, but also looking for the return on investment and how that knowledge gained can be competitive for them in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of the students that I work with, I would say twofold. Some of my students, they're very financially dependent. And so that's something that I have to keep in mind. But then a lot of my students are on the opposite spectrum, where there is no price tag, but they have dual passports and kind of open dreams as far as where they're going to go. And then sometimes with the students that have the financial need, it's kind of limited in, the availability for scholarship in certain countries. And so with both of those concepts in mind, I really like to dive deep into my practice in advising my students on their next step in their dream university, on the destination. And I like to remind them that they're not just applying to a university, they're applying to a place. And this is a place they're going to be for, 4, 6, maybe 10 years. And it really needs to fit so many different boxes in terms of their personality, who they are, what their desires and needs are from a destination. And so I like to remind my students who are kind of, at the beginning stage of like, I could go anywhere. So how do I really narrow it down? I like to use myself as an example. I stayed close to home for my undergrad degree because I didn't have a college counselor and I just didn't know what opportunities were available. And I was financially dependent. So I needed to go somewhere that I could afford. And I didn't know what opportunities existed. So I just knew staying close in my state could give me like a cheaper tuition, and I could work in college and pay for it. So that was kind of my bubble. But if I could go back in time and receive the advice that I give students, I now know that the Netherlands has quite affordable options for university, more so than other countries. It's also a really diverse area. So if you're looking to be exposed to other cultures or have quick access to travel around Europe, which was something that I'm passionate about, that would have been like the best fit for me. So I like to remind students, if you're looking for really good post-graduation citizenship options, Canada really streamlines that more than the US. If you're looking for affordable options in a diverse area, the Netherlands really offers that. If you're looking to, a lot of my students are in Asia, if they're looking to stay close to home, but also get far enough away that they can have a new experience. A lot of my Vietnamese students will go to Singapore or they'll go to Thailand, and they're still within, a 2-hour flight back home, but they're still far enough to have that independence. A lot of my students locally here in the UAE, they want that study abroad experience, but they know they're going to be coming back. So making sure that they're, if they're scholarship dependent, finding a university that's going to be in that price tag, but that also is going to be really recognized when they come back here so that they can find a job easily. And so I think, to sum it up, a lot of my students, they come to me with like a name in mind because they heard their friend went there, or they heard it's a top 100 school on some list, and they're all, kind of biased, as we know. And so I like to wipe that from my students and put the pressure first on making sure it's a good destination for them. What's the weather going to be like? Will they need a car? What's important to them? Do they want to have something to do in the evening and be in a big city like New York? Or do they want to be in a smaller, close-knit community where their friends or their family? And really pushing all these things that they probably don't want to hear about. They just want to go to that top 100 school that their parents are pushing. But really using the destination to drive the conversation.
I love it. I love it. Okay. So anyone that knows me well knows that I like disrupting the system, and conversations with higher education, especially in the current economy and how the world is looking in terms of changing careers. I'm always very skeptical about the purpose of uni. I'm an advocate of education. Anyone that sees my track record will see, well, this woman never stopped learning. How is she helping young people? But again, it's expensive to go to university, and not all careers require uni on its own. Some don't require it at all. I don't believe in the exception. I believe in looking at, let's do our research. So how do you help a student when they say, yes, I want to go to uni? That is a cultural experience I want to have. I want to gain more knowledge. I believe it's going to make me learn more about myself. However, how do you ensure that the degrees or the majors that they choose are actually preparing them for work? So I'm going to tap back into something I heard you say. For students, as an example, that do come back, you want to make sure that they're going to be able to find a job. How do you make sure that that can happen? What's the strategy that you use?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what you said is so important. And I try to remind my students of that every day, is that, at the end of the day, more often than not, a degree is a degree, and the piece of paper is like a check in the box for the job. But it's the skills that we develop that really get you the job. It's the networking that you have. It's the mindset, the skills, the work ethic that you're learning at university, at internships, at entry-level jobs, that then propel you to the other jobs. And I like to use tangible examples with my students. So one of the jobs that I had in Portugal, that was a Fulbright scholarship. It's a really prestigious opportunity to get, and it's very limited. And I had a scholarship going to a very unrecognizable state school in Florida, because that's what I could afford. I couldn't afford a brand name like Harvard, but one of my colleagues, who was my equal, he went to Harvard. And we joked that we both had very separate university experiences, and everybody was always enthralled that he was a Harvard graduate. And they didn't know where I went to school. They never heard of the University of North Florida. But at the same time, both of our different paths led to the same opportunity. And we were able to cordially acknowledge that he then had so much debt. He had so many student loans to pay off. And he spent 4 years kind of doing research in a library, which is great if that's kind of like the experience you want. Whereas I had opportunities to afford internships. I had entry-level jobs that I was able to do during my time in university. And I feel like I developed a lot of skills outside of just doing a lot of research. And at the end of the day, we both ended up at the same job. And so usually when I tell that story to my students, they kind of take a step back and they think, okay, well, maybe, if I'm not somebody who if I hate reading, why am I applying to a research institution that offers the same degree at a more affordable university where I can get scholarships and also get, maybe a paid internship. And then those skills are going to be what take me to the next level when I'm applying for a job. And so I like to remind students that, if you want to be doing something like vocational, if you want to be a hairdresser, or if you I have a student who wants to work in a mechanic shop, you can easily go to a smaller school or a community college and have networking, have skills being built, do these vocational programs, and then oftentimes make so much more money than most people. I know I had one student that I worked with before. It's one of my favorite success stories. She wanted to be a welder. And her parents were like, no, you need to go to college to be an engineer. They wanted her to go to an Ivy League school. And I was able to speak to them and say, if she goes to school and gets into all this debt, the degrees there are not going to help her be a welder. But if she goes to this really affordable, 2-year welding school, if that's what she wants to do, she can start making, $80,000 a year by being a welder. And the student ended up doing that. And, she only spent 2 years at a vocational program, was very affordable, and she'll make more money than I'll ever make. And she's happy. And so I think it's the skills that we build. And there's so many different price tag institutions that can lead to the same piece of paper that gets you that job, that it's just important to break those stereotypes and disrupt it, like you said.
Very important to be able to do that. I love those success stories. I think they're great. And one of the things I heard you say is parent as the influencer, you having to also have that conversation. I think sometimes counselors forget that behind every student is a huge influence coming from parents, and parents are being influenced by their community, society, and so on and so forth. And it really isn't just the student's story being kind of unwrapping, is it, Philip? It's also unwrapping the wishes of a parent or the regrets of a parent and kind of projecting that onto their children. If a parent were watching this right now, what do you know in your experience that might help them kind of ease their anxiety as they're taking children through this process?
Absolutely. I think it really does come down to anxiety, but also their understanding of like reputation, and they want their own legacy to be kind of vicariously lived through the student. And so they want their students to go on to do these really grand things and go to really top universities, because I think subconsciously it's a reflection on like their family name and what they want. And so I like to do two different things with that. I like to remind them, ultimately it's the student's journey. And I like to put a lot of pressure on, what does the student want? And whether it's a private conversation with the student or with the family involved, I like to really engage the student, make it student focused, and ask them, can you tell me like what it is do you want? Whether that's a physical place you want to be, if you've just been passionate about being in the UK for university, or is it, I just want to be in a big city where I can do really cool activities. I just want to be somewhere where I can study psychology and be a really good psychologist one day. Like, what is it that you want? Not just out of the university experience, but in your future. It's the pivotal moment of where you're becoming an adult. But then I like to ask the parents, what is success to you? Like, what is success to them? And really just have them think deeply on different people that they know. And I think once they realize, oh, I know that person, they didn't go to what I consider a top school, but it is a good school and they're happy. They have a family, they can support their kids. They're in a location that lends itself to opportunities. And I think getting the student to really dive deep and conscientiously decide on what it is they want out of their next steps, but then also redefining success, whether that's just making enough money to support a family, whether that's, working for a top business one day, and then really kind of backwards mapping. Okay, well, there's so many different ways to get there. There's so many different physical roads to the same destination, but which is the best one for them? And I think that kind of helps them have that eye-opening experience that, okay, maybe we can explore more than just the original ideal that we came in with.
Yeah, it's a tough one, isn't it? I know as a parent myself with a teenage daughter starting that journey, you do have to take a conscious effort to go, wait, nope, not my life. I'm just here with her on that journey. It's a tough one for a parent because here's this baby that suddenly is going to fly the nest, and you need to trust that you've done everything you can to make sure that they can take those next steps. I always wonder, how did my parents do it? Like I didn't have, as you, I didn't have a guidance or any kind of counselor that helped me with careers. My parents trusted me. Like, how am I an adult, right? And I think sometimes as parents, we look at our children and think, they're not ready. I need to make the choice for them because they're not ready. But like you said, it is, what does success mean? What does happiness mean for a parent, and helping them do that? Philip, your top 3 career tips, you say, are be open-minded to change. Obviously, your journey of how you happened to find those opportunities meant that you were opened, you explored. A little bit of like, haha, see, Mr. Harvard, I made it here too. That must have felt good. I think probably as a young person, you were always probably thinking, I hope I'm making the right choice. And sometimes we focus on our limitations. I know young people do. They're kind of like, especially in the UAE, it's such a luxurious place to be. When you are in a position that your peers don't need to even look at the cost of something, but you might have to, you're always constantly thinking, is this that right choice, as you were saying? But you also say, don't give up on the road to success because it's not easy or quick. Tell me more about that, because that's a hard one for a young person.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that stems from just, we might have these visions of what we want, but it might not be the easiest way to get there or a quick one. And I know, immediate satisfaction, we all want that. And nowadays, I feel like with social media, it's so quick to get that, that dopamine burst, but sometimes it takes patience. And so I know I reflect back on my dream, of course, again, going back to New York, was to go to NYU. And I remember coming home, I had my acceptance letter and I was all excited. And I told my mom that I was going to go to NYU. And she joked and she was just like, who's paying for that? Like, how are we going to afford that? Like, I came from a very, very small town. My parents work on small farms and a horse business. And so that's kind of where I stayed local because I could afford it. But I still feel like I wanted to go to New York because I wanted to be in a big city. And so, I've since lived in Beijing in China. I've lived in Ho Chi Minh in Vietnam. I've lived in Lisbon in Portugal. I'm now in Dubai. And so I still made it to these big cities. And that was ultimately what I wanted. I wanted to go from this small town in Florida, being on a farm with my parents, to being in a big city. And so I couldn't get it immediately. I couldn't go right to New York, but eventually I still got to go to these big cities. And I think it's the same with careers. It's like, I enjoyed my time teaching, but I think ultimately my passion is counseling. And I didn't know that at first. And I needed to put in the time in other roles to really develop what that passion was going to be. I think there's such a big push for kids to know immediately, even in 10th grade, what is it that you're going to do? And so I like to remind students, it's great if you know what you want to do, but be open that you could be completely wrong. I'm not a graphic designer or a journalist, but I was so determined that that's what I was going to be when I was that age. And if I had really been stubborn and stuck with it, then I wouldn't have evolved to where I am, which at the end of the day, if people ask, what are you? What do you do for a living? I'm happy. I give back to kids. I work in education. And so I think it's being open-minded to change, but also being patient, because sometimes, good things don't come immediately. If you're searching for that immediate result, you might miss something along the way.
Amazing. Okay, let's look at your number 3. It says, embrace the unknown and take many leaps of faith, because that's where those beautiful moments are and the answers come when least expected. Again, another hard one. This idea of the unknown, in my experience working with the youth, is what scares them the most. It's like, what if I make a mistake?
Mm-hmm.
What's a leap of faith in teenage speak? How do they know that what they're doing is taking a leap of faith?
Yeah. So I'm definitely biased in this one because I think I attribute it to myself working abroad, and sometimes moving to a new country is a scary experience, but at the same time, for me, it's simultaneously thrilling. And I think it's a lot of students, it's natural to want to stay close to home. It's natural to want to be in your comfort zone. And I think for students, that leap of faith is choosing to go to the country that they want to, even if they've never been there before, or studying at the school that they want to, if it's the best fit for them truly, even if it's maybe not what their parents want them to do, or picking, the subject they want to do. If they want to study art, even if it's not, engineering or medicine, which is a conversation we have so often, taking that leap that your passion can end up being a fruitful career, and that, you could make a lot of money doing something totally unconventional, or at the same time make enough to pay your bills, but then you're happier than you ever could have imagined. And so I think whether it's moving to that new country or taking a leap on, maybe passion over what your parents want to study, it's just doing that hard decision and knowing that in time it can pay off with hard work and passion and dedication.
Thank you so much, Philip. It was a really fun conversation to have, and lots of nuggets that our youth can take away. And I think parents and counselors alike can learn so much from your experience. I do believe you're still a storyteller. As you said, you're just helping young people develop their stories. And I think every time you sit with a student, you are telling a story of a student from before, maybe even in your own story. So definitely that skill has not left you behind. And that brings us right to the end. Thank you, Phillip. And thank you everybody for watching. We were speaking with Phillip Wenturine, who is a university counselor and AP coordinator. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you at our next Let's Talk Careers with Miss V.